You, Madam President. We certainly appreciate being here today. And good day to you. And thank you for joining us in is Minority Business DOA, Dead on Arrival. Advocacy is a major component of the services we provide as CEOs of the affiliate councils of the National Minority Supply Development Council. Last year, after the UNC and the Harvard decision, we found ourselves unprepared regarding the attacks on affirmative action. Now more than ever, we must advocate for the future of minority business. This webinar begins our 2024 educational campaign to mobilize our MBEs and partners. Understanding is our first step. It is important that our businesses and partners are involved in the movement. We brought together some of the region's most respected experts to guide us in urgently confronting our current crisis. Their insights will equip our attendees today. The stakes are too high, ladies and gentlemen, for us to ignore. We must do something about it. And so let's just talk, and I want to say I'm here in conjunction with my co-chair. I serve as one of the co-chairs along with Sherry Henderson, the Tri-State Minority Supply Development Council of the Public Policy Committee for the affiliate presidents. And so we'll talk about that in just a moment. And thank you to Ingrid for hosting the platform from us, and then my team, of course, and I'll talk about that later as well. So let's move on to the agenda for today. We're going to get through introductions and purposes, answer that question, is it DOA? We're going to look a little bit, we're going to talk about Project 2025. We cannot get past this conversation without talking about Project 2025. We're going to talk a little bit about historical perspective, some of the court challenges, where we are today versus last year, and the call to action. What can you do? What should you do? That's kind of where we're going with this conversation. In our next slide, what I'd like to be able to do is that I'm going to come back to this, but when it comes to what can we do, who can I talk to, I'm going to ask you, since we're having guests from all over the country, I'm pointing you back to your affiliate president in your region, because the power, what we have found is that in our jurisdictions, and we did this in terms of our strategy last year, we met with our local legislators, and these ladies and gentlemen, the affiliate presidents of the Minority Supply Development Council, are the folks that you should engage with, along with our MBEICs, MBE input committees across the country. But this is where the buck stops relative to what we're trying to achieve from an advocacy perspective. And so we're gonna point you back to them. I want to first talk to you about who'll be talking to you on this conversation. And I just want to, these folks have great reputations, have great backgrounds, great competencies in this area called minority business. I'm just going to give you just a snapshot, just so folks who, if you don't know who they are, that you have some sense. I'm going to start with, we're going to do beauty and brains. Diane E. Sumter, founder and president CEO of DESA Inc. She's the operator, also the operator of the South Carolina Minority Business Development Agency Business Center. DESA Inc. is a 38-year-old business services firm located in Columbia, South Carolina, and she has been serving, her organization is serving minority businesses for the duration of its 38-year existence, including more than 30 years as an operator, and one of the longest-serving operators of the U.S. Department of Commerce, South Carolina Minority Business Development Agency Business Center. Sumter has spent more than 40 years working as a catalyst for change in South Carolina and the nation. As a business leader, she has concentrated on economic development while strategizing and leading advocacy efforts for small, minority, and women-owned businesses. As a community activist, she has dedicated time and resources to the causes of educational advancement and cultural awareness. If you want somebody in your fight, it is Diane Sumter. I'm going to talk next about Nigel Stevens, principal of Phoenix Strategies, Inc. Nigel has over 25 years of experience in legislation and public policy, government relations, and public affairs. He's worked for the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, on political campaigns and in the private sector to drive initiatives around innovation and IT modernization, small business and entrepreneurship, minority business development, modernization of government, and economic development. Prior to launching his firm, Phoenix Strategies, Nigel led government affairs offices for 2 Fortune 500 IT service and software providers with a significant footprint in the public sector. Last but not least, is someone that you also want to get to know. That is Franklin M. Lee, is a partner in the Baltimore-based law firm of Tidings and Rosenberg, LLP. What you should understand that prior to entering this private practice where he is focused on minority businesses, in 2002, he served 16 years as chief counsel of the Minority Business Enterprise Legal Defense and Education Fund, known as Invaluable, a national nonprofit public interest law firm founded by Maryland Congressman, the late Congressman Perrin J. Mitchell, to defend the class interest of minority business community. As chief counsel of Invaluable, Mr. Lee was directly involved in preparation and pleadings and briefs in the Supreme Court cases in opposition to constitutional challenges to minority business programs. Examples of these high-profile court cases, which he led, included J.A. Croson versus City of Richmond, Adiron Constructors, Inc. versus Pena, and Adiron Constructors, Inc. versus Minetti. Most recently, his duty has included providing state and local governments with MBE program litigation, defense policy review, and policy development services to bring minority businesses or their programs into compliance with the law. I just want you to understand who you're listening to today. And if I could have them brought on screen, we can begin the conversation. And folks, we cannot have this conversation about where we are and where we want to go. The conversation to look at is a debt on arrival, look at historical context of what we talked about, to look at highlights of some of the lawsuits, how it's affecting businesses, and then how do we fight back? But is minority business debt on arrival? The answer is yes, if Project 2025 is implemented. And so for those who don't know what Project 2025 is, and when you it refers to a strategic plan on a roadmap developed by the Heritage Foundation, a think tank, in anticipation of political change in government policies if a certain political outcome occurs, such as the election of a specific candidate. The project outlines some dramatic changes and proposals on how government policies should work. Panelists, let me just ask you, what specific challenges do you anticipate for minority businesses that we might face if Project 2025 recommendations are implemented? And how would the collaboration between minority business owners and public policy influence the outcome of Project 2025? Anybody want to begin with that? Let's come on.
Thanks, Sharon. I'll start off, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the regional presidents of the Minority Supplier Development Council for hosting today. So Project 2025 needs to be looked at in the historical context. This is not the first time we've had a blueprint for conservative policies be offered. Something very similar was offered at the beginning of the Reagan administration that became what we know as Reaganomics. Okay, and there are different sides of that with regards to entrepreneurship growth, and challenges with regards to other policies throughout the federal government. But what you need to understand and why you need to study this 900-page massive document, right? This is a section by section. It is 30 chapters that reviews every single aspect of the federal government, standing 13 agencies, as well as quasi-governmental agencies, of what they're planning on changing if coming into power. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is an overall blueprint to go through every single agency and eliminate everything that is DEI related. So every Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, every Office of Diversity, any program that is applied towards increasing opportunities for diverse populations will be reviewed and essentially eliminated. That has a trickle-down effect to every single aspect of minority business, including your small business office. the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization, which implements a lot of the contracting programs at the agency level. All of the work that is being done at Minority Business Development Agency, MBDA would basically have their charter restructured. So they're no longer providing services through their MBDC network. They would be essentially a statistical entity. They would be reviewing policy analysis, providing policy analysis and providing statistical reports, but they would not be providing services, and they would not be providing grants to the entities that are on the ground, like yours, like Ms. Sumter's, that are actually providing the technical assistance and services to minority businesses, right? So I know Franklin's going to go through some of the court cases that are tied to this, but we need to understand that this is a guide for what they plan on implementing, and we need to understand, what does this mean for the agencies that run the programs that benefit our communities? Is minority business DOA? My answer is no, but right now we have minority businesses that are extremely robust. The community is growing. The number of businesses being started, the growth in contract dollars going to minority businesses is continuously increasing. But even at the federal level, the number of contracts being awarded is not increasing, right? So we are at a pivot point. We are at a significant point in our history where going in one direction could be a significant benefit, not only to the minority business community, but to the economy as a whole, and for American competitiveness in a global marketplace. Or we could move backwards and undermine the thing that is going to be the driver for our economic future.
Anyone want to kind of add with that? Because the things that we hear about is like banning abortion, eliminate meals for school children, mass deportation of immigrants, the Second American Revolution. I heard the head of the Heritage Foundation talk about. Anyone else want to offer anything relative to this?
Yes, Sharon. Greetings, folks. It's sort of like as the late great philosopher once said, it's deja vu all over again, Yogi Berra. The granddaddy of this Project 2025 that Nigel just spoke about was also the architect of the strategy that attacked the City of Richmond's MBE program and City of Richmond versus Croson, the Heritage Foundation. They actually held meetings back in the 80s on a monthly basis where they brought in the Reagan administration's Deputy Attorney General of Civil Rights to meet and kind of strategize over what case they wanted to take up to the Supreme Court. And his name was Brad Reynolds. Brad Reynolds picked out the Richmond case as the ideal case on the facts to take to the Supreme Court. It went up to the Supreme Court, and for the first time ever, the Supreme Court applied what's known as strict scrutiny to any kind of race-conscious remedy for discrimination. When they won that decision at the Supreme Court, Brad Reynolds, the Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Reagan administration, was named Man of the Year by the Associated General Contractors, the organization that funded much of that litigation. So here we are in, 2024?
Mm-hmm.
And they're back. They're coming back with a vengeance. So it's the same old game. We've got some new players, but it's the same old game that we had back in the 80s. That's kind of the good news. We've seen this before, but the level, the magnitude of this assault is unprecedented. Unprecedented. We've got about 12 or 13 different organizations that have joined in this fight, some of which are ones that we saw back in the 80s, like the National Center for Public Policy and Research, the Center for Individual Rights, Pacific Legal Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, the Federalist Society, which has been instrumental in helping to pack the courts with judges and that will be sympathetic to this cause of eliminating all vestiges of affirmative action in DEI. And then, of course, the Heritage Foundation. Some of the newer players on the battlefield now are Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. These are very innocuous sounding names, but you have to be very, very careful. And we'll get to this a little later, but you better be careful that your corporations out here are not accidentally or supporting these organizations with donations, because we've learned that they've got at least about a $35 million kitty to bring litigation to attack all forms of DEI. Californians for Equal Rights Foundations is another one of these attack conservative legal foundations. Mechanical Contractors Association of Memphis. The America First Legal Foundation, which I believe is headed up by our good friend Stephen Miller from the Trump administration, who was the architect behind the Muslim ban, among other great initiatives.
And
the American
Franklin,
Alliance for Equal Rights and Alliance for Fair Board Recruitment. But these are the kind of entities that we're being confronted with here, and we have to meet them in kind.
okay. And Franklin, what I'd like to do is this. I want to get Diane here because I want to, we can talk about Project 2025 for the entire hour that we're on, but I want to get Diane here for just a moment before I then switch into coming back to you in terms of you giving us just a very, very brief historical perspective of how we got here. So Diane, any thoughts about Project 2025, particularly from your perspective as a business owner?
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you for allowing me to speak. So on this, what I consider one of the most dangerous entities we've faced since I started this business. I met Franklin when we were picketing in front of the Supreme Court on the Adirondack decision. And we thought that battle was of such that we could still handle it. But as I look now, it's an undercurrent going on. It's already affecting. Yes, we're talking about Project 25, but just last year, there was additional funds allowed for SBA. But for this state, we had fewer 8A contracts than we've ever had, simply because the contracts went to already contractors who was of different size. When I look at the businesses, there's a fear, there's a timidness, there's am I going to be in business? And that's having such a negative impact. And then you see the bigger population waiting to see what's going to happen. Do we have to do something now? Maybe we won't implement this disparity study. Maybe we won't implement it with the same amount of gusto we would have ordinarily. So when you think about it, even though we're talking about Project 25, and it may or may not come in when we may or may not change administration, we already see a severe aura in the clouds that's affecting every business that we have, including the large business. You also see it in financing. Right now, they've not only started going after different kind of investment funding, but they've slowed up and looking differently. It used to be you could depend on, if I had my financial statements, if I had a credit score of this, etc. Now they're sliding back some because they want more and more and more. So things are very nervous around here from the business community. And I'm very anxious, even as a business, that we need our second and third generation businesses who we've worked with through this entire time to step up now and strongly participate with us so we can see how we go about a change.
Yeah, great advice. And to hear, Diane, that you were on the battlefield with the Adirondack decision and picketing, you know, there's some lessons there in terms of how do we get our voices heard. Let me first now switch back in terms of the framework about affirmative action. And Franklin, since the UNC and Harvard SCOTUS decisions, there have been some dramatic and traumatic consequences for minority business movement. Where did it begin? Who's behind it? And what, if anything, is different about the current threat that to the very concept of supply diversity and growth and success of minority-owned businesses? I know this is another topic, it can take hours, but I got to get it down to here so we can make sure we use this hour. Thank you.
Yes, Sharon, no doubt. America's response on any issues involving race and racism has been at best schizophrenic over the years, going all the way back to 1865, but we won't go back that far. This latest round of assaults against any form of affirmative action really started last June with the Supreme Court decision on Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina, and then a similar case against Harvard University. where the court just did a complete reversal on prior legal precedents and said that any use of a racial classification in the context of college admissions is unconstitutional per se. That was kind of a sweeping decision. It only affected technically college admissions, but the reality was this whole army or cadre of conservative legal foundations was poised to pounce on that and to immediately push the agenda into other arenas, such as minority business and supplier diversity. You immediately had a letter that went out from 18 state attorneys general, call it a love letter, if you will, that threatened Fortune 100 companies that had supplier diversity initiatives and forewarned them that you may be next. Surely you would not want to violate the US Constitution. And they falsely claimed that the Supreme Court decision involving college admissions made it so. Fortunately, immediately after that, maybe with a week or so after that, there were about 22 other state attorneys general across the country that substantively responded to that nonsense that came out of that love letter and gave great detail citations to legal precedents that said otherwise, that you are not constitutionally forbidden from having remedial programs to remedy the effects of discrimination in the marketplace, supplier diversity programs. But there have been a barrage of other lawsuits as well that you need to be aware of. I'm just trying to let you know where we stand on the battlefield at this point, and the truth will ultimately set us free, hopefully. We had a case involving the 8A program, Ultima versus U.S. Department of Agriculture, where the 8A program's preferences for certain social groups to be socially and economically disadvantaged, that presumption was attacked and indeed has been enjoined. So now the SBA has basically stopped accepting applications for the 8A program until they figure out what to do. Newsyard versus MBDA was another case. Even technical assistance that's been provided through minority business development centers across the country has been attacked. And that too has been shut down from the standpoint that resources cannot be targeted solely to minority businesses. You have to offer that technical assistance to everyone. Even though the SBA may be providing similar technical assistance to all small businesses, any effort of targeted assistance to just minority businesses has been attacked under the Newsyard precedent. And last but not least, just last month, we had a very bad decision come out of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which imposed a preliminary injunction against a private equity fund, the Fearless Fund. You may have heard about this. It's been in the news a lot. Out of Atlanta, Georgia. This was a fund that had come up with a program to have a competition for startup firms that were owned by Black females to provide $20,000 grants through a competition to some of those startup firms. That was attacked. You would think you could certainly not be prohibited from helping your own, with particularly segments of the business population that have had unequal access to capital for eons. But the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has said otherwise, and indeed kind of twisted some of the legal precedents that we've had involving Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was one of the original forms of affirmative action that came out of the Civil War, out of the end of slavery, which was basically a statute that said if no citizen should be denied the right to make and enforce contracts on the basis of race, you're supposed to have the same rights as white citizens. And that's been kind of turned upside down by the Supreme Court. So what does this mean? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the rule of law in this country with this Supreme Court is on life support. And there's a vicious rumor going around that the gas and electric company had just sent out a cutoff notice. That's kind of where we are at this point. Now, we're going to get to, it's pretty bleak, and the hour is getting late, but we're not out of it yet. And we have to figure out a way to move forward, because failure is not an option. We have every right for our businesses and our communities and our families to continue to try to thrive in business, to generate wealth, to feed our families. That cannot be accepted as something that can be taken away. And so we just have to be smarter and better and more aggressive in how we defend those rights.
Thank you, Franklin. Nigel, did you want to add something relative to what's going on today? And we talked about the Project 25, talked a little bit about perspective, and I do want to get back to InvaluableDef in just a moment. But what about some of the regulatory impact or anything else you'd like to add relative to this conversation?
And I definitely want to get to InvaluableDef, because that is a direct, we need a response to the legal challenges that we're facing around the country. But the most insidious part of this, yes, we can talk about Project 2012 as a specific example, right? Again, this is 30 chapters, agency by agency. I mean, it's short-sighted in its implications, where you're even going after Export-Import Bank had a wonderful announcement a few months ago where they're expanding their program to drive opportunities for American businesses, American diverse businesses, but American businesses, to do more work overseas with export and import. And they're bringing guarantees and things like that. They would shut down those programs and defund those programs because they're identified by the folks who wrote this plan as helping diverse companies. And that is inappropriate in their view, right? That's discriminatory for women and minority-owned businesses to get this assistance for international trade. These are American businesses. This is undermining everything from telecommunications. You're looking at transportation. The amount of money that went through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that's supposed to be making it to all these communities, the work that's being done through the Department of Energy and EPA for Justice 40 initiative for environmental sustainability and so forth, that would be cut off. I just had a meeting with the head of diversity over at Department of Commerce, and she's talking about how they can help get the $50 billion that was allocated through the CHIPS and Science Act, the CHIPS for America Act, to bring microchips manufacturing back to the United States, to make sure that diverse companies are playing a role in building that ecosystem. That's going to be the future of technology for the next 100 years. And she wants to make sure that diverse companies play a role in that, because that's a DEI initiative in the eyes of this plan that will be eliminated. So this is undermining the growth of economic opportunity for the United States. And what does that mean? When Franklin's talking about impact on communities and so forth, it's the environment that was created that Diane talked about. It's not just this thing by itself. It's the combination of the court cases, the plan, the legislative, the policy, the Chevron case, and the Supreme Court, which now has basically gutted the ability for federal agencies to be treated as the subject matter experts when implementing legislation. And as a former staffer, I'm up on Capitol Hill right now, as a former staffer who's drafted legislation numerous times and had bills passed, Congress is not equipped to write the legislation in the detailed way. They can write the intention, but it is the people who have been given 30 and 40 years of their career and spent their time getting educated on exactly what the policy should mean when you're implementing it. Those are the folks who are now going to have that power taken away from them, and it'll be decided by the courts or have to be written explicitly in legislation. And I'm telling you, that's just not how our enterprise was built. That's not how the federal government was built. So this is going to have resounding implications, but it's the environment that was created. We are seeing what is happening at the federal and state and local level in these court cases impact the private sector. We see companies now walking away from shutting their DEI offices down and walking away from their commitments. The Tri-Caucus, we call it informally the Tri-Caucus. That is the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Asian Pacific American Caucus. They individually sent letters to the Fortune 500 asking them to remain committed to their stick to their commitments for DEI, whether it's recruiting, hiring, retention, but also supplier diversity. Make sure they remain committed to that. And they are still working with those companies to make sure that they stick to their commitments, right? Because we're starting to see these implications in the private sector as well. So it's not just a Project 25. It's not 2025. It's not just the court cases. It's the entire environment that's being created. And we're undermining our own ability to grow the U.S. economy through entrepreneurship. Again, so we just left this meeting. Their Department of Commerce is talking about what are we doing to bring chips to America because we're competing with China. Every hearing I go to, we're talking about China, China, China. I don't care if it's about homeland security, defense, or technology, innovation, education. It's about how we compete with China. We cannot compete as 350 Americans, 350 million Americans. We don't have enough population to compete economically with 1.3 billion Chinese if we keep doing things policy-wise to take entire segments out of the economy. We cannot take portions of our population out of the economy and think we're going to be able to compete. So what are we trying to do with these programs? If we're able, this is not my numbers, this is Kellogg Foundation. By 2050, if we're able to close the economic gap, right, the racial gaps in health, incarceration, and employment, we will add $8 trillion annually to the U.S. economy. $8 trillion, okay? NBDA 2023 study said if we're closing the business opportunity gap for diverse entrepreneurs, we can add $6.3 trillion annually to the economy. That will increase the number of paid employees by MBEs from 9.3 million to 31.2 million employees. That's tripling the number of jobs available. And we're going to increase the number of minority-owned firms from 9.7 million to 12.3 million. That will add taxpayers, that's taxpayers, that's business, that's jobs, that's entrepreneurship. Those are the things that we should be promoting throughout the United States and creating opportunities to grow our economy and grow the U.S. competitiveness in a global marketplace. These initiatives, these plans undermine the ability for U.S. economic growth.
If I can just add on to what Nigel just said right
Sure.
there, the key notion that we have to keep in our minds and in our advocacy is that these programs are about inclusion as opposed to exclusion. One of the things that came out of this recent 11th Circuit preliminary injunction against the Fearless Fund was that their competition was limited to Black firms. And did not focus on the benefit of adding to the marketplace additional firms that could, in fact, generate more wealth and enlarge the size of the pie. We're not slicing up the pie, taking something from someone else. We're adding to our economy by bringing in new firms. And that's a key notion that we really have to stress and push in all of our advocacy, both in the halls of Congress, in the corporate boardrooms, and also in the courts. It's got to be a consistent message all the way across. Inclusion as opposed to exclusion. The good thing about NMSDC's initiative, its supplier diversity program, is exactly that. You're trying to enhance competition with the large corporations by bringing in new vendors, developing new capacity, and enhancing competition in that way is good for everyone. It creates new jobs and it creates new tax revenues for state, local, and federal government. And it lessens the burden on each individual in terms of having to pay taxes. The more wealth you can generate, the more you can turn over, accelerate the cash flow and the exchange of transactions from one firm to the next, the larger our economy grows within the same time frame. And that's the only way this nation can be competitive. Our demographics are going in a direction such that if we don't close this wealth gap that we have, it's been growing exponentially, really since the Civil War, we're not going to be top dog for very long. Just not going to happen. So the stakes are high, not just for diverse suppliers, but for all the major corporations and for the nation as a whole.
And that is why our messaging is so important in terms of we've all have to be singing off the same page in terms of the current impact that we have and then what the challenges will bring. Diane, if I can bring you in at this point in time, how have these legal assaults on supply diversity and economic inclusion, and Frank can talk about inclusion versus exclusion, what services, resources, and contracting opportunities for diverse suppliers rather are being threatened and endangered, and how would you describe the current environment for economic inclusion?
You know, as we discussed earlier, the current environment is extremely nervous and everyone is on edge. But at the same time, we know that every agency is affected. Education is being hit harder than you can even dream of. But then there's SBA, EDA, MBDA, USDA. When you look at that project and you look at every one of those agencies, you clearly see that all of the federal agencies are being, but at the same time, there are certain states who have already started implementing things for their state and reducing it. You know, when I look at my state, I shudder when I think about the money's going to private school, which I think is a good idea. And I also think the charter school is a good idea, providing it did not reduce the money going to the regular public school. But as long as the money followed the child, we're already impacted severely. Every business here needs to we need to rethink the conversation and begin to talk about workforce development. We pay more taxes than the others pay many times because we don't have the same level of CPA and don't have the same knowledge. But all of the businesses are paying taxes, hiring people, serving on boards and commission. So they're doing all that they can to be a part of this economy and add to it. But the marketplace at this time is shutting the door little bit at a time. So what we're encouraging businesses to do is let's stay on the positive. Let's make certain that we realize this isn't about minority. This is about business. And whatever they do to minority business, it will affect the larger business population.
That's so important. And Diane, you and I both have MBDA centers. And so we've been down this road before in terms of under administration where they tried to do this, that, and the other to us. Any insights in terms of you want to provide there as well?
It has been tried over and over and over again, except there's a bit difference with this time. You can actually see and feel it. Before, we never felt that it was going anywhere because, you know, we were younger, had much hope, and knew that we would change this world. That's how I came out of graduate school. Now that I'm just a tiny tab older, my fear is taking over, and I don't see the same kind of hope for my great grands and many of the others. So if there's anything missing, we have to go back and get the generations behind us to see there is hope. You can participate. And we need the younger businesses, we need to help them. You know, we always had shoulders to jump on. So we need to provide them our shoulders, and if not all, one by one. So when I look at what we're doing at the centers, I'm extremely nervous because for once, we do not see the capacity that we once had. And I'm not certain what's going on with Congress, et cetera. You know, the NEVI project has no goals in it. That just really troubled me. And I hear us talking about chips, but I've been trying to find a way to get the chips to see how do we even enter the market? How do we take our businesses so that they can be a part of it? So there's a lot going on now. It's just a matter of how do we access this information so we can be more powerful, and how do we get the businesses to really coalesce? Because you know what? I know I thought, but we pay taxes too. So we have a right to how this tax money is spent and want to have some involvement in it. So with all this going on, it's still a good time to do what we do, but we've got to be very strategic about it, collectively do it together, and see how we can get more folks to join us.
Okay, I want to say thank you, Diane. I want to segue, and so we want to leave some time for some Q&A, but I want to segue into that question about what is it we can do. Nigel, if failure is not an option for the minority business community, how should we be fighting back against the current assault? And what steps should we demand Congress to take? Diane is a great example of her inclusion of her local and state and federal legislators, policymakers, to get done what she needs to get done. So if you and Nigel, and thank you for the work that you're working with the 23 affiliate presidents in order to educate us so that we can educate others. Can you kind of take us through what we are doing and what we can do?
Sure. And thank you for using the term failure is not an option, because oftentimes we use this, you guys hear it all the time. This is the most important election it's ever been since the last election. That was the most important election it's ever been. And then you hear that this is an existential threat. But let me be clear. It's in the plan. Okay. So Diane's talking about the work she's doing on the ground in the community, helping entrepreneurs build their businesses, right? Helping these minority businesses build their businesses. The plan eliminates the ability for the Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency to provide service. So that will no longer exist. The Minority Business Development Centers will not be there to provide service. It will not be federally funded. So the grant dollars and all that will dry up. Okay. The section on the Small Business Administration, there's a chapter on the Small Business Administration. They want to freeze the funding at the current level, but double the funding within that pool for the Office of Advocacy. Why? Because they want to use the Office of Advocacy as an arm to go after regulations in other agencies and require all regulatory changes to be reviewed by SBA prior to release. So those funds have to come from somewhere. It's not that the Office of Advocacy is bad. As a Senate staffer on the Small Business Committee, we work with them quite a bit. They're a wonderful organization. They do a lot of great work. But when you double their budget from inside the SBA's budget, that has to come from somewhere, right? SBA's already underfunded, but now you're going to cut that from somewhere. So we need to understand the implications. This is existential. These entities will not exist. If the continuation of the environment and more private sector entities eliminate their DEI offices and eliminate their supplier diversity programs, there will be no more heads of supply chain supplier diversity. Those jobs are gone. Those jobs will be gone. Okay. The folks who are focused on diversity and equity and inclusion in the small business office within the agencies, if this follows through, those jobs will be gone. So when I say existential, this is not just, are we going to reduce some contracts? No, this is across the board. Okay. Now, somebody popped up on the screen and talked about that they are a defense contractor. The Undersecretary of Defense has already testified before Congress 3 years ago, saying that the number of contractors available to DOD to compete for contracts have shrunk to such a degree that is a national security threat. They need more businesses. They need new entrants to the marketplaces of all sizes, small, medium, and large, to compete for contracts at DOD in order for them to be comfortable with the competitive nature of their environment. They are having the same problem with regards to implementing some of the programs around EV charging stations and solar panels and so forth, CHIPS Act and so forth. They're saying they can't find the business. They need to recruit new businesses to the marketplace because the number of companies are so low that they cannot find companies capable of doing federal work, right? This is a competitive challenge to our federal government and to our private sector. We need to support these businesses in order for all businesses to grow, not just minority business, all businesses to grow, and for Americans' economy to stay competitive. So what have we been doing? What can we continue doing? The 23 presidents started a program last year where they went and met with their elected officials, their members of Congress, their governors, their state delegates, and so forth in their local jurisdictions. Why is that important? As former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, used to say, all politics is local, right? We can talk about national issues and so forth, and it's a large esoteric conversation. But the reality is that your member of Congress needs to understand what is happening in their backyard and how these decisions that are being made in Washington are affecting you, the businesses that are in their districts, that are employing people in their districts, that are sponsors of the church that are funding the church, that are sponsors of the Little League team, that the Circle K, and all the things that you guys do as leaders in your community. You are the backbone, the financial backbone for your community. As Franklin talked about, you can't talk to me, I'm just gonna go very specific, about schools and roads and bridges and hospitals in your community when your tax base, you don't have a robust business tax base to feed from. That's where the resources come from your local community. So if you're going to undermine those businesses, all of you have employees, all of you have office space that you rent, you buy office supplies from the local whatever, right? You have your own supply chain that you support. They need to understand the implications of that if they start implementing policies that undermine your ability to compete and to grow. So you need to educate your elected officials at the local level. So MBEs, we need to hear from you. This is now my third week. Sharon, you can talk to it. When we came to Washington, D.C. in October of last year, we met with numerous members of Congress, folks from the administration, folks from federal agencies and so forth, and they kept saying the same thing. We need to keep hearing from you. We need to hear on the ground what's happening in our communities and how this is affecting our MBEs. Corporate entities, we need you guys to start building relationships. If you're the head of your small business office, your supplier diversity office, your government affairs people need to understand the positive impact that your role plays in the bottom line of that business. They need to understand how you help open new markets, how you help open new contracting opportunities, how you help deliver on contract requirements by bringing diverse suppliers to the table, and how that helps your business bottom line and your larger business grow. They need to understand that in order to respond to the Tri-Caucus letters. They need to understand that to make the argument of why these programs that affect small business are so important to the growth of large business. Okay, that's when we start making the conversation that they're having about China and international trade and international development mean more to those members of Congress who are focused on what's happening in their backyard. We need to connect the dots, and we need you to stay engaged. We've been sending out things like the Did You Know? Okay, that's a bi-weekly just policy update of what's happening in Washington, D.C. and how it affects you. It's business related. It's not necessarily political. It's not necessarily policy-wise all the time. It's about business incentives, business issues that are happening that are affecting your organization and would affect your ability to compete. We are asking you to stay engaged, to talk to your 23 presidents on a regular basis, to make sure that when the time comes that we need you to write a letter of support, that we need you to write your member of Congress, to tell your story, to tell your narrative about the challenges you face, we need you to be engaged to know when to submit that information, because that's what the decision makers need up here to defend your programs. That's what they need to take to court. That's what Franklin and Embeldef and those folks need to take to court to defend your programs. So we need you engaged. We need you to identify other companies that are not engaged and bring them to the table as well.
Okay. And certainly those actions. And that is the power of it, to your point, Nigel, of it happening in our respective jurisdictions, 23 affiliate councils across the country, because when we do it simultaneously, that is the power of the affiliates, and that's how we get this done. And the voice of our minority businesses is the biggest voice that can be heard relative to all of this happening. We have a few minutes left. I want to be able to open it up for some questions. I hope that you've placed some of your questions in the Q&A. We won't be able to get to all of them. We want to talk about Embeldef before we leave here, because that's very important. On the screen now are some very important dates relative to right now. You know that the Republican National Convention is going on, and our prayers are with, and we're saying give peace a chance. We know what happened over the weekend. That should not be, and that is just the worst thing that can happen in terms of all the chaos and confusion that's going on in this world and in our country today. The Democratic National Convention coming up in August. What we've been talking about, the affiliate presidents are now, during the August 2nd through September 6th recess, will be meeting in our local jurisdictions on our march to Washington on September the 10th, our day on the Hill. And you'll see that's right on before the Congressional Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus. And so these are significant dates that we're mindful of. That's part of our strategy. And we have a few minutes left. I want to open it up to questions. What's after this? Okay, this is last year's Day on the Hill. This is us, our photo op as we took our strategy to the Hill on that day. So let's go to some questions that and if the ones that we cannot get to, what we're committing to is answering them, if and then getting that information back out to you. Sonia, are you looking in our Q&A bucket? Can you?
Yes, yes, Sharon, this very important conversation has sparked quite many questions, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. This is also an extension to something you just led to. Stephen and several others have asked, who are the legal or legislative organizations collectively engaged in this battle on our behalf? Can you speak to legislative organizations and or lobbyists that are fighting on our behalf?
Well, I'll start off by saying that the 23 presidents engaged Nigel Stevens, Phoenix Strategy, in our educational piece, and that's who's educating and teaching us. And I also take this minute to say that Franklin Lee is the general counsel for the Capital Region, but that's not what you're asking. I'll let them answer that question.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure you contribute to the Minority Business Enterprise Legal Defense and Education Fund.
Yes.
That has been the legal vanguard since the 1980s to fight these battles in court, to make sure that we've got a fighting chance, even with this hostile, very conservative legal judiciary that we're dealing with today. If we're going to have any kind of chance whatsoever, we need folks to be able to fight those battles, that have experience, they've got the battle scars and everything, to understand how you fend off these attacks as much as possible, and then go on the offensive to the extent that we can. One other thing I just wanted to point out here in terms of strategies, we try to use the bad legal precedents that we've got to our advantage whenever we can. We did that with the Croson decision and coming up with commercial non-discrimination policies that address discrimination in the private sector. There's another Supreme Court case that's important, known as Citizens United. And this was the case where this Supreme Court said, you know what? Money talks. Money is a form of protected free speech under the First Amendment. And we haven't relied upon that as much as we should. We haven't applied that as much as we should. Yes, we need to walk by voting. We need to walk the walk by voting. We need to walk the walk by going to our legislators and advocating. But nowadays, talk is also considered money. And the more money you have, the louder your voice is. That's just the way it is. So I would call upon every business owner, be they diverse business owner or a corporate member of this organization, to use your voice. And ladies and gentlemen, it's time to not only walk to the halls of Congress, but to talk. We got to walk and talk at the same time and use every resource that we have in this effort. They will remember who supported them in running for office. That's the reality. And if you want to be heard, your voice is loudest when you're walking and talking at the same time.
Okay, Nicole Miles, my team, and thank you, Nicole, for everything you're doing for this webinar, has placed the MBLDEF information in the chat. And so that's really, really important. Anthony Robinson, who's leading that up today, has been on the battlefield for many years and has scars to prove it. But we have an entity that can support what we're doing, and we need to support it. You know, gone are the days that we're asking everybody to do our work. We need to support ourselves. So next question.
Yes,
go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Franklin. The next question comes from Victor, who indicates, I'm not as familiar with the Project 2025. Are these organizations against women-owned businesses as well? And how will it affect all ethnicities? The extension to that question is, how will these changes affect our existing contracts?
So with regards to 2025, it wasn't explicit. It just went after the DEI programs. Now, once you peel that onion and figure out what the DEI programs support, it also supports supplier diversity entity programs of the federal government and recruiting, retention, hiring, promotion efforts, including training. They even went after training. So if you want to see where they're going to target, look at there's a case against the Department of Transportation right now that's still pending in the courts, where the court did not, the plaintiffs are going after the entire small disadvantaged business program at the Department of Transportation for minorities and women. So they're going after it on its face. Okay, so while some of the attacks, the majority of the attacks have been on the race consciousness, and that's going after the fundamental definition that's in statute, is what they're really going after. Anything with race conscious definitions in it. And that is the backbone of all of these federal programs, whether it be 8A, SDB, MBE programs at the state level or at the city level, they're going after those too. But that train's never late. So when I tell women's organizations, you need to be a part of this struggle, because when they incorporate DEI, when they incorporate all things supplier diversity, it will include you too. It will eventually include you too. As a matter of fact, I just had a conversation. The Alaska Native corporations realized, wait a minute, when they go after that section in the statute, we're named right along with the racial classifications as everyone else. Now, all of a sudden, they want to play ball and say, let's work together and figure out ways to prevent the undermining of this whole the entire program, right? So the reality is clicking in to folks understanding that this is going to affect all diverse businesses, not just one pocket versus another.
One other ominous point that we need to be aware of here is that Project 2025 also calls for the dismantling of civil service structure. So when you wonder about, well, what's going to happen to the OSD booths? What's going to happen to the people that serve in government and helping to administer these programs? Well, basically, they're going to serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States, whoever that may be. If you take away civil service protections for those employees, they can just go away and they can be fired just like as if it was some kind of reality TV show. Okay? So that's where we are. The stakes are that high. And so we just have to fight like hell to make sure it doesn't happen.
And I think I would like to encourage everyone who's listening to do like I have already done, and that is contribute to Minority Business Enterprise Defense Legal Fund. We were warned when it started by the Congressman Perrin Mitchell that we needed to keep an arm fighting. Many of us, including me, did not do that. So at this particular time, I'm really begging that we all start looking at how we can contribute to that fund so we will have an arm that can work with us and work for us.
Sorry, listen, it's 1 o'clock, but hang on if you can. But I want to do a couple of things and take a couple more questions. Panelists, can you hang with me a few more minutes for those who can hang? Take a couple more questions. But
Sure.
What asking the question of what can we do? Nicole, can we bring up our last couple of slides? I just want to remind you. This filters back to the affiliate presidents of the Minority Supply Development Council. And so wherever you are in the country, we want you to reach out to your affiliate presidents. Our MBEIC, we have a national one, we have MBE Input Committee in all of our regional affiliates. And some others also have legislative subcommittees within the Minority Business Input Committees. Mine's led by Harris Floyd, and my MBEIC chair is Sonia Hobson. And so we have the structure in place by which we want to ensure that we seriously approach this strategy relative to keeping people informed. The next slide, reach out to your affiliate president for information. We have an email address, publicpolicy@crmsdc.org for any further questions post this conversation. Here's a QR code. Thank you, Nicole, to view our regional councils. I just wanted you to have that information So the worst thing you can do is get off and say, well, what do I do? And so I want to give you a moment for that. And then I want to go back and maybe take a couple more questions. So if you can hang with us, we've had many drop the mic moments, but this is not over by a long shot. And we hope that our goal is that the takeaway that you understand the urgency of the situation. That is our goal.
Yeah,
Next
and
question.
yeah, great, Sharon. And to your point, Michelle makes a comment and asks a question. Industry practitioners are very, very concerned about what this means for their jobs, their offices. What are we asking our corporate members to do to support our efforts?
I'll take a crack at that. This really is a moment of truth, and we've had these kind of inflection points throughout our history, going back to when the 13th Amendment ended slavery, and you had a Freedmen's Bureau Act that was enacted by Congress to provide remedies for the freed slaves, including 40 acres and a mule. Well, that check came back marked insufficient funds. The Freedmen's Bureau went bankrupt, and we've had a schizophrenic kind of a response on these questions of race ever since. It's time for our corporate community to stand up and be counted. Which side do you believe in? Do you believe in inclusion of all segments of our business population and having a right to participate in the marketplace, to be mainstream players in the marketplace, regardless of race or gender? Do you believe that every business that we create and support in our marketplace is also a customer of other businesses? Does that make for a more robust economy that benefits all? Or is it a pyramid scheme? Is capitalism meant to be a pyramid scheme that only benefits those at the top, and the rest at the bottom of the pyramid are just left scrambling for crumbs? Each successive generation falling further and further behind as inflation increases the cost of every bare necessity that we have, from the cost of education to the cost of housing, to the cost of fuel, the cost of energy. It's time to stand up and be counted, and we need to know who the true believers are. Are they with us or are they against us? And I think the country can only move forward and get past this schizophrenic illness that we have called racism in America. We can only get past it if we can find a way to come together and include everyone as full citizens, full participants in the marketplace.
And can I piggyback on that, Franklin? Because once they do stand up, right, MBEs as leaders in the community, on behalf of your businesses, on behalf of your communities, we need to highlight those folks and support them, because they are taking a risk and they are leading in and supporting our businesses, our communities. It's not just enough to look at the diverse community as the largest consumer base, right? We need to look at, they're looking at us as business partners and supporting our economic growth and our entrepreneurial growth. So we need to support them as they're doing that. The folks that are on the front lines, that are leading these supplier diversity offices in these major corporations, that are fighting the fight, that have a seat at the table, we need to make sure we're wrapping our arms around them. And those companies that are doing the right thing, we highlight them and encourage them through our support to make sure that that is a continuous cycle of improvement.
Absolutely. Next question.
Yes, thank you, panelists, for those responses. There is a question around, how do any of you on the panel feel that these changes will affect our existing contracts, state, local, federal?
Diane, you want to take that?
I'll take it. I was almost certain that if you look at your contracts, you will find that there's option years. It's the option years that very well will not get implemented. We saw that some past years. We had a contract that had 4 option years. Well, the option years never came about. So when you look at that impact, it have you plan on a much smaller and less timely basis. So we need you in this fight now so that those option years get implemented. And knowing that you're doing an excellent job and that it's to their benefit and yours to continue working with you. But option years can't be taken to the bank until it's signed.
And if you pass this prologue to the future, historically at least, the federal government has recognized, and even most state and local governments recognize, it creates chaos if you terminate every contract in the middle and then have to rebid everything before the contract's completed. But you know what? These are some strange times.
Yes.
I don't take anything for granted. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt, but the odds are, at least the way things have been done in the past, you will be allowed to complete your current contracts. But after that, the option years and everything after that, all bets are off.
Well, so Franklin, let me just jump in, because there was actually an issue with the Ultima case. This is the case against the 8A program where they eliminated the rebuttable presumption. The rebuttable presumption states that if you're in one of these racial classifications, you are presumed to be socially disadvantaged. So then all you have to do is now show your economic disadvantage. And anyone on the call who's ever gone through the process of applying to the 8A program know what a financial forensic audit that is, that they get all up in your business to prove that, so you can show your economic disadvantage. But they eliminated that presumption. The SBA came back and froze the 8A program, froze new applicants, and then froze what was going on in the program, the existing program, made everyone submit a narrative in order to show that they were socially disadvantaged. Once everyone submitted that narrative and it was accepted, then they reinstated the application process and required everyone, regardless of race or classification, to submit a narrative to apply to the program. The courts said, okay, well, is this enough? Does this resolve the problem? The plaintiff said no in the Ultima case. They said, no, we want you to freeze the existing contracts that have been awarded to companies that previously did not have to submit a narrative, right? When that tidal wave went through the federal government, particularly went through DOD, the scare of reality kicked in, because not just prime contractors that were small that got 8A contracts, but first tier and second tier subcontractors to these massive IDIQs, the indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, the massive contracts that are on these multiple award schedules and contract vehicles that had 8A subcontractors could come to a screeching halt, because you had companies that were existingly doing work for these large contractors that now all of a sudden you wanted to freeze that work as well. This is a structure that has been built over the last 50 years that now the companies have invested hundreds of millions of dollars. Large businesses have invested, small businesses have invested, the federal government's invested to create the structure. And what this would do is this would undermine, it's like a game of Jenga. It would just take pieces out the bottom, and when the whole thing comes crashing down, it does not only affect minority business. And that was the reality check that came in to this case in Ultima, where the judge, as conservative as they were not willing to allow the entire thing to come crashing down. Okay, but does this affect? It would have tremendous effects, not only on minority business. And that's another thing. Guys, let's change the narrative. These are American businesses that are helping at all stages of the American economy that happen to be minority owned. Okay, if you start undermining these American businesses, it will have significant ripple effects throughout the entire economy. And we need to start having that discussion at the local and federal levels.
Absolutely. You know, they say the way to wealth is entrepreneurship. And then when you start messing with that, then you, and we already have an issue with multi-generational wealth, right? And so that then gets really ballooned in terms of our future. We can take maybe about one more question, and then I'd like to go back, Nicole, with the screen that will show people how to get in contact moving forward, and just to be on the lookout in terms of and I want to thank the affiliate presidents of the National Minority Supply Development Council, my colleagues, for having the foresight to have this conversation. Our goal is to continue to educate. Sonia, one more question, if we could.
Yes, great. And Sharon, I'll just comment that there are many, many questions, and I think we're providing that for templates that people can, write letters and send letters, but having templates and things available. But you just mentioned the future. Tarsha asked a very important question. She said, what should our organization do, or what organization should we support that will create a strong message to our young voters, and how the agenda of Project 2025 will affect their future and the future of the minority community?
That's a good question.
You know, Sharon, I don't mind kicking in because we have started here trying to get the data on all of the X-Gen and the millennium. From that data, then we're getting who is registered, and then the same data who has voted. So we can get the X-Gen and the millenniums to begin talking so that they look at that this is a long-term strategy, and we need them to engage with us so that we can make some long-term changes, and their voices need to be heard.
I think that's a good point. And we have the infrastructure in place, right? When you look at the councils, right? And some of them even have foundations and have outreaches to the next generation. We have the NBDA centers. So we have the structures in place by which we can make that a mandate and a part of our priorities, actually. It's something that we should be looking into. Okay. You guys okay? You have given tremendous information. We certainly appreciate everything that for you taking the time to provide this, because education is key in terms of these topics. And of course, regardless of, I hear so much now, people are not going to vote. To not vote is a decision, which should not be allowed, but we ask people to exercise your rights in order to do that, right?
Right.
Any parting advice, words? Thank you, Tim. Any party advice or words from any of our?
So Sharon, I'll just close with this. I'm a lobbyist. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a lobbyist. Okay. I went to business school, not law school. So I am in Washington, unapologetic lobbyist, advocate. All politics is indeed local. We can talk about these things in Washington all we want. There's a reason why Congress has a 6% approval rating, but members of Congress have a 90% win rate, right? Because they come back home and they talk to you on the ground, and it's my member of Congress is great. It's the other 434 idiots that don't know what they're doing, okay? The power of every single so-called national organization is the ability to educate, energize, and mobilize at the local level. Period. That's the strength. You are the strength of every single one of these local organizations, of these national organizations. And many of you guys are members of multiple, okay? You are the ones that hire the people. If you want to talk about how to get to the millennials, these folks in college don't necessarily want to go work for somebody for 30 years.
Yes.
But without you leading the pathway, there will be no pathway to entrepreneurship and generational wealth and getting their just due. And they need to understand that. They need to get engaged if they want their own future. And we need you engaged to continue creating that pipeline and creating that pathway, because it's the local implementation that is going to create the outcomes that we want here in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Diane Franklin. Diane, any parting?
I think we've said it over and over, the involvement by all of the businesses, and we had talked about this earlier. I'm hoping that we can gather all of the stories from the businesses who have gained so much for so long, that then it will inspire the next generation of businesses. But at the same time, we get it to our elected officials, both city, county, state, and federal, so that they can see what we're doing has some movement, and to pull it apart now will be a destruction to America economy, period.
Okay. Powerful. Franklin?
Yeah, my final words are this. We are staring into the abyss, but be not afraid. It's better to be prepared than scared. As bad as things are looking right now,
Yes.
I draw strength from my ancestors, and I think all of us do on this panel. And maybe we need to share those stories of our families, our family histories, with our children and our grandchildren, so that they too are fortified against what they're confronted with here today. If you get turned off and you just throw up your hands and lay down and die, that's not what our ancestors did, because if they did, none of us would be here today. When those slaves, when those our family members, our ancestors were freed from plantations, they had no capital. They may have had a shirt on their back that they didn't own. They had no land. They had no way to sustain themselves. Yet we emerged from that abyss. We did business with one another. We formed communities like Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood in Florida, Katy in Durham, North Carolina. We thrived and we found a way to survive, because why? Failure was not an option. We have to provide for our families. We have to provide for the next generation. This too shall pass, because we're not going anywhere.
I'm going to drop the mic at that. And thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you again to my co-chair, Sherry Henderson of Tri-State Council. Thank you, Ingrid. Antoine Ferguson, you are the best, along with Nicole Miles, super woman. So Sonia Smith, Bigelow Smith, who is CRSCC's director of the Capital Readiness Program, Jolie Guerrera, and everyone involved. We thank you for making this hour and a half possible. More information to come. Again, this is part of our educational campaign to make folks aware and to mobilize and engage. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll see you next time. I feel like I need to have some theme music or something, huh?